They mocked the old mechanic for scrubbing the wreck, until the ship powered up and spoke his name. The salvage yard of Titan Station was the largest in the outer colonies. It stretched across 17 kilometers of open space, filled with broken ships, twisted metal, and the dreams of people who had once sailed between the stars. Thousands of vessels floated here in the cold darkness, some missing their engines, others missing their hulls, all of them waiting to be cut apart and melted down for scrap. Among all these dead ships, there was one that nobody could explain. It sat alone in Bay 7, at the far end of the station where the lights were dim and few people bothered to walk. The ship was old, not just old like the other wrecks in the yard, but ancient in a way that made people uncomfortable when they looked at it. Its hull was made of a black material that seemed to drink in light rather than reflect it. Its shape was strange, with curves and angles that did not match any known design from human or alien builders. The station records had no information about where it came from. The oldest workers could not remember when it had arrived. It was simply there, as if it had always been there, waiting in the darkness of Bay 7. Everyone on the station called it the coffin. Harold Price did not call it that. He called it nothing at all because he felt that giving the ship a cruel name was disrespectful. And Harold Price, despite what the younger workers thought of him, believed very strongly in respect. Harold was 67 years old. His hair had turned from gray to white many years ago, and his hands shook slightly when he tried to hold small tools. His eyes were not as sharp as they used to be, and his back ached when he bent over for too long. He had worked at Titan Station for 15 years now, ever since his retirement from the fleet, and in all that time he had never risen above the position of junior maintenance worker. This was not because Harold was bad at his job. He was, in fact, very good at it. He understood machines in a way that younger workers did not. He could listen to an engine and know exactly what was wrong with it. He could touch a power conduit and feel whether the current was flowing correctly. These were skills that took decades to develop, skills that the automated diagnostic systems could not replicate. But Harold was old, and in the modern fleet, old meant useless. The young technicians with their fancy degrees and their neural implants looked at Harold and saw a relic from a forgotten age. They gave him the jobs that nobody else wanted. They sent him to clean the parts that nobody else would touch. They laughed at him behind his back and sometimes to his face. Harold did not mind. He had learned long ago that the opinions of fools did not matter. What mattered was the work. What mattered was doing things right. And so, every morning for the past 3 months, Harold had taken his bucket of cleaning solvent and his bundle of soft cloths and walked to Bay 7 to clean the coffin. The first time he had done it, Danny Marsh had followed him. Danny was 24 years old, fresh from the engineering academy on Mars, and he had more confidence than any 10 people should possess. He was tall and handsome and clever, and he knew it. He had been assigned to Titan Station as punishment for some minor offense that he refused to discuss, and he had made it clear from his first day that he considered himself far too talented for such a backwater posting. Danny had watched Harold gather his supplies that first morning, with an expression of amused disbelief. "Where are you going with that old man?" Danny had asked. "Bay 7, Harold had replied. "Bay 7? There's nothing in Bay 7 except that old wreck, the coffin." "I know." Danny had laughed. "You're going to clean the coffin. That thing's been dead for centuries. What's the point?" Harold had not answered. He had simply picked up his bucket and walked away, leaving Danny shaking his head in wonder at the foolishness of old people. That had been 3 months ago. Every day since then, Harold had made the same journey. Every day, he had spent 2 hours before his shift began, carefully cleaning the black hull of the ancient ship. And every day, the other workers had watched him pass with smiles on their faces and jokes on their lips. "There goes old Harry again," Danny would say, "still trying to polish that junk heap back to life." "Maybe he thinks it's a magic lamp," another worker would add. "Rub it enough times and a genie will pop out." The only thing that's going to pop out is Harry's back. They would laugh, and Harold would keep walking, and the coffin would wait for him in the darkness of Bay 7. Today was no different. Harold arrived at Bay 7 just as the station's artificial dawn was beginning, the lights slowly brightening to simulate a sunrise that no one on Titan Station had seen in years. He set down his bucket and looked up at the ship that had become, in some strange way, his only friend. The coffin was beautiful. Harold had always thought so, even when he had first seen it 15 years ago. Its black hull curved in ways that suggested speed and power, even though its engines had been cold for longer than anyone could remember. Its lines were graceful, almost organic, like the ship had been grown rather than built. There were no visible seams, no bolts or rivets, no signs of the construction methods that humans used. It was a mystery wrapped in darkness, and Harold loved it. He dipped his cloth in the solvent and began to work. The cleaning was slow and careful. Harold moved his cloth in small circles, removing the dust and grime that accumulated even in the sterile environment of the station. He paid attention to every centimeter of hull, treating each section with the same care and attention. Some might have called it obsessive. Harold called it thorough. As he worked, he talked. "Good morning," he said softly. "I hope you slept well. I didn't sleep much myself. Bad dreams again. The same ones I always have." He moved to a new section of hull and continued cleaning. "Danny was making fun of me again yesterday, called me a crazy old fool. Maybe he's right. Maybe I am crazy, but I don't think so. I think there's something special about you. I've thought so since the first time I saw you." The ship, of course, did not respond. It had never responded, but Harold kept talking anyway because the silence was easier to bear when he filled it with words. "I used to work on ships like you," he said. "Not exactly like you, of course. I've never seen anything exactly like you, but ships with soul, ships that felt alive. Do you know what I mean? Probably not. You've been asleep for so long, but back in my day the best ships had something more than just engines and computers. They had a presence. You could feel them watching you, listening to you. It sounds crazy, I know, but it was real." Harold paused and looked up at the ship's dark viewport. For a moment he almost thought he saw something move inside, a flicker of light or shadow. But when he looked more closely, there was nothing there. "I'm probably just imagining things," he said with a small laugh. "That's what old men do. We imagine things." He went back to his cleaning. An hour passed, then another. The solvent in Harold's bucket grew dark with grime, and his clothes became stained beyond saving. His back ached and his knees protested every time he bent down. But he kept working because there was still more hull to clean, and Harold Price did not leave a job half-finished. He was working on a section near what he believed to be the ship's main airlock when his cloth caught on something. Harold stopped and leaned closer, squinting at the hull. There, barely visible against the black surface, was a seam he had never noticed before. In 3 months of daily cleaning, he had never seen this seam. Harold set down his cloth and traced the line with his finger. It ran along the panel in a complex pattern, curves and angles that might have been decorative, or might have been something else entirely. The pattern seemed to shift as he looked at it, the lines rearranging themselves in ways that hurt his eyes to follow. And the metal was warm. Harold's heart stuttered in his chest. The rest of the hull was cold, the same temperature as the station's air. But this panel, this small section near the airlock, was warm. Not hot, not burning, but definitely warmer than it should have been. He pressed his palm flat against the panel and closed his eyes. 40 years ago, Harold had been the chief engineer of a ship called the Starlight Dream. She had been a beauty, one of the last vessels of her kind, equipped with a neural interface that allowed her to bond with her crew. The bond was not like anything that could be described in words. It was a connection, a joining of minds between human and machine that made them more than the sum of their parts. Harold had loved the Starlight Dream, not in the way that people love objects, but in the way that people love other souls. She had been his partner, his friend, his companion through the dark spaces between stars. When she spoke to him through the bond, her voice had been like music. When she shared her thoughts with him, it had been like watching the universe through the eyes of a god. And then she had died. A reactor failure, a cascade of explosions. The Starlight Dream had sacrificed herself to save her crew, shutting down systems one by one to prevent the blast from reaching the escape pods. Harold had felt her die. He had felt the bond stretch and tear and finally snap, leaving a void in his mind that had never healed. That had been 40 years ago. The bonded ships were all gone now, destroyed or decommissioned after the Cascade incident, when a ship called the Wandering Star had flown herself into a sun rather than accept the death of her captain. Humanity had decided that the bonds were too dangerous, too unpredictable, too much like love to be trusted. Harold had never stopped grieving. Now standing in Base 7 with his palm pressed against the warm hull of the coffin, he did something he had not done in 40 years. He reached out with his mind, the way he used to reach out to the Starlight Dream, searching for a presence, a connection, a sign that something was alive inside the darkness. "Hello," he whispered, "can you hear me?" "Nothing." He tried again, pushing harder, reaching deeper. "I know you're in there, I can feel you. Please talk to me." Silence. Harold opened his eyes and laughed at himself. It was a sad sound, full of years and grief and loneliness. "Old fool," he muttered, "talking to dead ships. Maybe Danny is right about me after all." He gathered his supplies and turned to leave. His shift would be starting soon, and there were engine parts to clean and floors to sweep. The coffin would still be here tomorrow, and the day after, and all the days after that, waiting in the darkness for an old man who could not let go of the past. He was at the door of Bay 7 when something made him stop. Harold turned and looked back at the ship. For a moment, just a moment, he could have sworn he saw a light flickering inside the coffin's darkened viewport. A small blue glow, faint as a distant star, pulsing once, twice, 3 times before fading away. He stared at the viewport for a long time, waiting for the light to return. But there was nothing, just darkness, just silence, just an old ship that had been dead for centuries. "Probably just my eyes playing tricks," Harold said to himself. "That's what happens when you get old. Your eyes stop working right." He turned and walked away, not looking back again. If he had looked back, he might have seen the light flicker once more. The morning shift at Titan Station was busy, as it always was. The salvage yard never stopped working. Ships came in broken and went out as raw materials, their hulls melted down, their components sorted and recycled. It was honest work, important work, the kind of work that kept the colonies running. But it was also loud and dirty and exhausting, and by the time the shift ended, Harold's whole body ached. He was walking back to his quarters when Grace fell into step beside him. Grace was 32 years old, one of the senior technicians on the station. She was small and quick, with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. Unlike Danny and the others, she had never been cruel to Harold. She treated him with a distant respect that he appreciated, even if it sometimes felt more like pity than genuine regard. "Long day?" she asked. "They're all long days at my age," Harold replied. Grace smiled. "I saw you this morning, coming out of Bay 7. Harold's step faltered slightly. "Oh. Yes, you've been going there a lot lately. Every morning, right? Is that a problem?" "No," Grace said quickly. "No, not a problem. I was just curious. Why do you do it? Clean that old wreck, I mean, the coffin." Harold walked in silence for a moment, considering his answer. He could lie. He could make up some practical reason, something about maintaining the station's inventory or checking for salvageable parts. But he was too tired for lies tonight. "She deserves better than this," he said finally. Grace raised an eyebrow. The ship. She deserves better than to sit in the dark, covered in dust, forgotten by everyone. She was beautiful once, I know it. She had a purpose, a mission, a crew who cared about her, and now she's just nothing. Scrap metal waiting to be recycled. That's not right. It's just a ship, Harry. No ship is just a ship, Harold said. Not the ones worth remembering. Grace was quiet for a moment. Then she shook her head and smiled again, though there was something different in her expression now. Something thoughtful. You're a strange man, Harry Price. So I've been told. They reached the corridor where their paths diverged. Grace went left toward the senior quarters, and Harold went right toward the small room he had called home for 15 years. They said their good nights and parted ways, and Harold thought no more about the conversation. But Grace did not forget. 2 days later, she found herself standing at the entrance to Bay 7. The door was old and heavy, its controls sluggish from lack of maintenance. Grace had to enter her access code 3 times before the lock finally disengaged, and the door slid open with a groan of protest. Bay 7 was dark. The overhead lights flickered weakly, barely enough to see by. Grace activated her personal lamp and stepped inside, sweeping the beam across the cluttered space. There it was, the coffin. Grace had seen the ship before, of course. Everyone on the station had seen it at some point, but she had never really looked at it. Now, standing alone in the darkness with nothing but her lamp for company, she looked. The ship was smaller than she had expected. Not tiny, but not the massive hulk she had imagined either. It was perhaps 50 meters long, sleek and angular, with a hull so black that her lamp light seemed to disappear into it. The design was like nothing she had ever seen. It was not human. It was not or any of the other alien races she had studied in school. It was something else entirely, something older and stranger and more beautiful than any ship she had ever encountered. "What are you?" she whispered. The ship did not answer. Grace walked closer, her feet crunching on the debris that littered the bay floor. She reached out and touched the hull, half expecting it to feel strange or alien. But it was just metal. Cold, smooth metal, no different from any other ship she had touched. Except there was a section near the airlock that felt different, warmer, almost alive. Grace snatched her hand back as if she had been burned. She stared at the hull, her heart racing in her chest. The warmth had been faint, barely noticeable, but it had definitely been there. And cold metal did not warm itself. "Okay," she said, taking a deep breath. "Okay, there's a logical explanation for this. Maybe there's some residual power in the systems. Maybe there's a chemical reaction happening in the hull material. Maybe." She trailed off. None of her explanations felt right. None of them accounted for the feeling she had gotten when she touched that warm spot, the feeling that something was watching her, waiting for her, hoping she would understand. "I'm being ridiculous," she said firmly. "Harry has me spooked with all his talk about ships with soul. There's nothing alive in there. There can't be." She turned and walked out of Bay 7, and she did not look back. But the feeling stayed with her. And that night, when she finally fell asleep, she dreamed of blue lights flickering in the darkness. The days passed, as days do. Harold continued his morning ritual, cleaning the coffin with patient devotion. The other workers continued to mock him. Grace continued to think about what she had felt in Bay 7, and the ship continued to wait. On the 7th day, everything changed. It started with a message. Commander was in her office, reviewing the daily reports when the communication alarm sounded. She looked up at the screen with irritation. Unscheduled communications were rare on Titan Station, and they were almost never good news. "This is Commander," she said. "Identify yourself." The screen flickered and resolved into the image of a face that makes blood run cold. It was the alien's scaled skin was a mottled gray-green, and its eyes were yellow slits that seemed to look through her rather than at her. Its mouth was full of small, sharp teeth, and when it smiled, it was not a friendly expression. "Commander," they said, "I am War Leader Thresh of the Dominion. I bring greetings from the High Council." hand moved toward the alarm button under her desk. "The Dominion has no business with Titan Station. We are an independent facility, outside your sphere of influence." "That is no longer true," Thresh replied. "The High Council has claimed this sector for the Dominion. All facilities within the sector must submit to authority. You have 24 hours to prepare for our arrival and surrender." "And if we refuse?" Thresh's smile widened. "Then we will demonstrate why refusal is unwise. I look forward to meeting you in person, Commander." The screen went dark. Sat frozen for a moment, her mind racing. Then she slammed her hand down on the alarm button and began issuing orders. Within minutes, the entire station was in chaos. The news spread fast. They were coming. 14 warships, according to the long-range sensors, more firepower than Titan Station could hope to resist. The station's defense grid was designed to handle pirates and small raiding parties, not a full Dominion fleet. They had no chance. "We need to evacuate," said Gary Cole, executive officer. He was a nervous man at the best of times, and these were not the best of times. His hands shook as he pulled up the evacuation protocols on his data pad. "The escape pods can hold most of the civilian population. If we start now, we might be able to get them away before they arrive." "And go where?" demanded. "The nearest friendly station is 3 days away at maximum speed. They will intercept the pods long before they get there." "Then what do we do?" Had no answer. She stared at the tactical display, watching the 14 red dots that represented the fleet moving slowly closer, and tried to think of a way out that did not end with everyone she was responsible for dead or enslaved. She could not find one. The word reached Harold as he was finishing his shift. He heard the announcement over the station's speakers, the calm voice of the automated system explaining that all non-essential personnel should proceed to the evacuation zones. He saw his dropping their tools and running for the exits, their faces pale with fear. But Harold did not run. Instead, he walked. He walked through the chaos and the shouting and the crying, past the security officers trying to maintain order and the families clutching their children and their few precious belongings. He walked until he reached Bay 7, and then he stopped and looked at the coffin. The ship sat in the darkness unchanged, cold and silent as it had been for centuries, but Harold did not see cold and silent. He saw potential. He saw hope. He saw, perhaps, the only chance any of them had. "I know you can hear me," he said, pressing both hands against the hull near the airlock. "I know you've been listening all these months, even if you couldn't answer. I felt you wake up a little bit, that day when the panel was warm. I know there's something alive in there, something waiting." The ship did not respond. "There are people on this station," Harold continued. "Good people, families with children, young folks with their whole lives ahead of them. They're scared and they have every right to be. They don't take prisoners, they take slaves, and anyone who resists they kill." He pressed his forehead against the cool metal, closing his eyes. "I don't know who you are or where you came from. I don't know why you've been sleeping all this time or what you're waiting for. But if there's any part of you that can hear me, any part of you that cares about life and love and all the things that make existence worth living, please, please wake up. Please help us." Tears ran down his weathered cheeks, dropping onto the hull and rolling away into the shadows. "My name is Harold Price," he said. "I was chief engineer of the Starlight Dream. I loved her and she loved me, and when she died, a part of me died with her. I've spent 40 years feeling that emptiness, that hole in my soul where she used to be. If you know what that feels like, if you understand the bond between a ship and her crew, then you know I'm telling the truth. You know I would never lie about something like this." He took a shaky breath. "Please," he whispered, "please wake up." For a long moment, nothing happened. The ship remained cold and dark. Harold's heart sank. He had been foolish to hope. He had been an old fool talking to a dead ship, believing in miracles that did not exist. He started to pull away. and then the hull began to glow. Harold stumbled back, his eyes wide, as blue light rippled across the black surface of the ship. It started at the panel he had been touching and spread outward in waves, like circles on a pond after a stone is thrown. The light was soft at first, barely visible, but it grew brighter and brighter until the entire hull was shimmering with an inner radiance that hurt to look at directly. The ship was waking up. Harold heard shouts from somewhere behind him. He turned and saw Grace standing at the entrance to Bay 7, her face illuminated by the blue glow, her expression a mixture of fear and wonder. "Harry," she screamed, "what's happening? What did you do?" "I don't know," he shouted back. "I just talked to her. I asked her to wake up." The light grew brighter still. The ship began to hum, a deep vibration that Harold felt in his bones. It was a sound he recognized, a sound he had not heard in 40 years. It was the sound of a ship's heart beginning to beat. And then, impossibly, the coffin's engines ignited. The blast of energy was controlled, contained, but it was still enough to knock Harold off his feet. He hit the floor hard and lay there, staring up at the ship as it rose from its resting place for the first time in centuries. The hull gleamed in the blue light, all traces of dust and grime gone, and Harold saw now what the ship had been hiding beneath its layer of decay. It was beautiful. It was the most beautiful ship he had ever seen. The airlock opened with a hiss of pressure, and a ramp extended toward Harold. From deep within the ship, a voice spoke. "Harold Price." The voice was female, warm and musical and ancient. It carried the weight of centuries, the wisdom of ages, the love of 1,000 bonds formed and broken. It was like the voice of the starlight dream, but deeper somehow, more resonant, more alive. "I have been waiting for you," the voice said. Harold struggled to his feet, his old bones protesting. "Who are you?" "I am the Meridian," the ship replied. "I am the last of my kind, the final survivor of the Bond Wars, when humanity still understood that some partnerships transcend mere technology. I have slept for 217 years, waiting for someone worthy to wake me." "Worthy?" Harold shook his head. "I'm not worthy of anything. I'm just an old man who cleans engine parts." "You are Harold Price, chief engineer of the Starlight Dream. Your service record is exemplary. Your bond with your ship was one of the strongest ever recorded. When she died, you felt her passing as if it were your own death. You have carried that grief for 4 decades, never letting go, never forgetting. That is worthy." The blue light pulsed, and Harold felt something brush against his mind. It was gentle, questioning, asking permission rather than demanding entrance. He recognized the sensation immediately. It was the touch of a bonded ship seeking a connection. "You've been cleaning my hull for 3 months," the Meridian continued. "Every morning before your shift you come here and care for me, not because you have to, not because anyone asked you to, but because you believed I deserved dignity even in sleep. Your patience, your care, your grief for the ship you lost, these things called to me in my dreaming. I heard your voice. I felt your touch. I knew your heart." The touch against Harold's mind grew warmer, more insistent. "I am offering you a bond, Harold Price, a partnership between human and ship, the kind that your people have forgotten. Together, we can save this station and everyone on it. Together, we can remind the universe what humanity was capable of in its finest hour. Will you accept?" Harold looked up at the ship. He thought about the fleet approaching, 14 warships full of soldiers who would kill or enslave everyone he knew. He thought about Danny and Grace and Commander and all the others, the people who had laughed at him and the people who had been kind to him, all of them facing death because they had no way to fight back. And he thought about the Starlight Dream. He thought about the bond they had shared, the love that had transcended the boundary between flesh and metal. He thought about how empty he had felt for 40 years, walking through life like a ghost, half of his soul missing. "Yes," he said, "I accept." The bond snapped into place like a key turning in a lock. Suddenly Harold could see everything the Meridian saw. He could feel her systems coming online one by one, engines and shields and weapons awakening from their long slumber. He knew her history, not as words or facts but as lived experience, memories that stretched back 2 centuries to a time when bonded ships had sailed between the stars and humanity had been feared and respected throughout the galaxy. And she knew him. She knew his memories, his hopes, his fears, his dreams. She knew the love he had felt for the Starlight Dream and the grief he had carried when she died. She knew the loneliness of his years on Titan Station, the mockery of the younger workers, the quiet dignity with which he had faced his declining years. She knew everything about him, and she accepted it all. For the first time in 40 years, Harold Price felt whole. "We have work to do," the Meridian said, and her voice was inside his head now as well as in the air around him. "The fleet will arrive in less than an hour. We must prepare." "Can we beat them?" Harold asked. 14 warships." The Meridian's response was not words but a feeling, a surge of confidence and power that made Harold's breath catch in his throat. He felt the ship's weapons systems, arsenals of destruction that made the fleet look like toys. He felt her shields, barriers of energy that could withstand the combined fire of 100 vessels. He felt her engines, capable of speeds that bent the laws of physics themselves. "They have forgotten what humanity was capable of," the Meridian said. "They have forgotten the ships that broke the siege of Mars and liberated the colonies of Jupiter. They have forgotten the bonds that made us more than the sum of our parts." Through their connection, Harold felt her joy at being awake, at being whole again. And beneath the joy, a fierce protective fury for the station and its people. "Let us remind them," the Meridian said. Harold climbed the ramp and entered the ship that was now part of his soul. The interior was nothing like he had expected. Instead of the cramped corridors and cluttered compartments of a normal vessel, he found himself in a space that seemed to flow and shift around him. Walls of liquid light that changed shape according to his thoughts. The bridge, when he reached it, was a simple platform surrounded by holographic displays showing every aspect of the ship's systems. He sat down in the captain's chair, and it molded itself to his body as if it had been made for him alone. "Are you ready?" the Meridian asked. Harold looked at the displays. He saw the fleet, 14 red dots moving steadily closer. He saw Titan Station, small and vulnerable, its pathetic defense grid flickering with uncertain power. He saw the escape pods, still docked, full of people who had nowhere to run. "I'm ready," he said. The Meridian's engines roared to life, filling Bay 7 with light and thunder. The outer doors opened automatically, and the ancient ship rose from its resting place and sailed out into the void. Behind them, the people of Titan Station watched in stunned silence as the coffin, the dead ship that had sat in Bay 7 for as long as anyone could remember, transformed into something out of legend and flew to meet their enemies. The fleet commander was called Thresh, and he was a veteran of 30 campaigns against species that had thought themselves capable of resistance. He had crushed rebellions on a dozen worlds. He had burned cities and enslaved millions. He was feared throughout the Dominion as one of the most ruthless warriors that had ever produced. When the Meridian appeared on his sensors, he felt something he had not felt in decades. "Fear." "What is that?" he demanded, staring at the readings on his display. "Where did it come from?" "Unknown, war leader," his sensors officer replied, his voice trembling. "It emerged from the station's salvage bay. There is no match for its design in any of our databases." "Power levels." The officer was silent for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. "The power output is equivalent to our entire fleet combined." Thresh stared at the screen. The ship was small, barely larger than a patrol craft, but the energy signature it was broadcasting was impossible. No ship that size should be capable of generating such power. It violated everything he knew about physics and engineering. "It must be a trick," he said, "a bluff designed to frighten us. Continue the approach." But his voice lacked conviction, and his crew heard it. The Meridian came to a stop between the fleet and Titan Station. She hung in space like a predator waiting for its prey, her black hull drinking in the starlight, her engines humming with barely contained power. "They are hailing us," the communications officer reported. On screen, the display flickered, and Thresh found himself looking at a human face, but not the face he had expected. Instead of a young, frightened commander begging for mercy, he saw an old man with white hair and steady eyes, sitting in a chair that seemed made of light itself. "This is Harold Price of the Meridian," the human said. "You will withdraw from this system immediately. The people of Titan Station are under my protection." Thresh bared his teeth in what passed for a smile among the "one ship against 14. Human arrogance never ceases to amaze me. You will surrender or be destroyed." The old man smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. It was the smile of someone who knew something that Thresh did not, and who was looking forward to demonstrating that knowledge. "I was hoping you'd say that," Harold replied. The Meridian moved. Thresh had seen fast ships before. He had chased down fleeing vessels and caught them with ease. He thought he knew what speed looked like. He was wrong. The Meridian did not fly. She danced. She spun and twisted and rolled through space with a grace that should have been impossible for any ship of any size. One moment she was directly ahead, the next she was above, then below, then behind. The gunners tried to track her, tried to lock on with their weapons, but she was never where they expected her to be. And then she started firing. Her weapons were like nothing Thresh had ever seen. Beams of blue light lanced out from her hull, striking his ships with surgical precision. They did not destroy. They disabled. One by one, Thresh watched his warships go dark as their engines failed, their weapons powered down, their shields collapsed. The Meridian was taking them apart without killing a single member of their crews. "Return fire," Thresh screamed. "All ships return fire." But his ships could not respond. Their systems were dead, their weapons offline. In less than 10 minutes, 14 warships had been reduced to floating hulks, and not one of them had managed to land a hit on the impossible vessel that had destroyed them. Thresh stared at the tactical display, unable to believe what he was seeing. His flagship was the last ship still functional, and its power levels were dropping fast. "War leader," the communications officer said, "the human ship is hailing us again." On screen, Harold's face appeared. He looked tired but satisfied, like a man who had completed a difficult job well done. "Your fleet is disabled," Harold said. "Your crews are alive but stranded. I am willing to let them remain that way. Withdraw from this system. Never return. Tell your masters what you saw here. Tell them that humanity remembers. Tell them that the bond is not forgotten." He leaned forward, and his eyes burned with a light that seemed to come from somewhere beyond the physical. "And tell them that if they threaten these people again, I won't be so merciful." Thresh tried to think of something defiant to say, some threat or curse that would salvage his pride, but he could not find the words. He had been beaten, beaten by one ship, beaten by an old man and an ancient vessel that should not have existed. "This is not over," he managed finally. "The Dominion does not forget insults." "Neither do we," Harold replied. "Meridian out." The screen went dark. 3 days later, a rescue fleet from the Dominion arrived to collect the disabled warships and their crews. They found no trace of the Meridian or Harold Price. The ship and its pilot had vanished into the depths of space, leaving behind only stories and legends, and the memory of blue light dancing among the stars. On Titan Station, life slowly returned to normal. The salvage yard reopened. The workers went back to their jobs. Commander wrote her reports and tried to explain to her superiors how a single ship from the station's junk heap had destroyed an entire fleet. Nobody quite believed her. But Grace believed. She had seen the blue light. She had felt the warmth of the hull beneath her fingers. She had watched Harold Price walk up the ramp of the Meridian and disappear into a partnership that transcended the boundaries of flesh and metal. On the day after the battle, she had found a message waiting for her in her personal files. It had no sender identification, no timestamp, no origin data, just a few simple words. Thank you for being kind. The universe needs more people like you. I'm going to find the others now, the ships that are still sleeping, waiting for someone to remember them. When I'm done, I'll come back. Take care of yourself, Grace, and if you ever need me, just call. I'll hear you. It was signed Harold. Grace read the message 3 times, then saved it to her most secure storage. She did not tell anyone about it. Some things were too precious to share. But sometimes, late at night, she would go to Bay 7 and stand in the empty space where the coffin had once sat. She would close her eyes and reach out with her mind, the way Harry had taught her without even knowing it. And sometimes, very faintly, she thought she could feel a distant warmth, a gentle presence watching over her from somewhere among the stars. The Meridian was out there, Harold was out there, and they were not alone. In the depths of space, scattered across 1,000 systems, other ships waited in the darkness. Ships with souls, ships with bonds waiting to be formed, ships that had been forgotten by a humanity that had grown afraid of the love between person and machine. One by one, Harold and the Meridian would find them. One by one, they would wake them up. And when they were all together, when the bonded ships flew again in the numbers they had once known, humanity would remember what it had been capable of. The Dominion would remember too. They would all remember. And the stars would tremble.